We are here tonight with Jacob. This is a community that teaches its children and grandchildren to show respect. Here is the good news. Both of these gentlemen have served in the armed forces of the United States of America. So that both Ted and Elan. A very, very special thank you. So, gentlemen, you will join me up here. And what I'm going to ask each of our candidates to do in their opening statement, which they have not heard this particular question before, issue, is the following. You've heard that I know that these are two accomplished individuals, great patriots. If you watch the commercials, seem like really nice guys. Why? Considering that Congress's approval rating is in the low teens, why are you running? And if you could, in 2.5 minutes, could you please list for us your top 2 issues that you want to dive into when you become Congressman in this district? So going to start, if you want.
Well, thank you all very much. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you all very much. Rabbi Cooper, Rabbi Tom, thank you for opening up the synagogue to us. To the Szabo family, we worked very hard to set this up. Thank you all of your debt. This is a full house here. And so thank you. I have 3 kids, thank God, and I think every parent wants to hand over to the next generation a community, a people, a country, a world that is better than the one they had. And my fear is that if we don't make the right decisions today, and I mean today, I don't mean in 10 years or 5 years before it's too late, but today, we will be handing over to our children, God forbid, an America and an Israel that is less safe, less secure, less prosperous, less preeminent in the world. And I could not live with myself. And so that is the answer. The very simple answer is I'm running for Congress for my kids. And not just for my kids, but for all of America's kids who deserve the best possible future. And so we're going to talk, I'm sure, today about a whole host of issues. Issues that I care about. Education, that's a top issue for me. Education is my #1 issue. I'm a criminal gang prosecutor. So I have a track record over the last decade of fighting for American families. And I do that every day. So education for me is a huge issue. And economic opportunity, because once you graduate from schools, they need jobs. But one thing I want to open with is an issue that compels me to run for Congress at least as much as any of the others, if not more, and that is Israel. I am deeply concerned by the precarious position Israel is in. We saw thousands of rockets just shot at Israel recently. There are 100,000 missiles aimed at Israel from Hezbollah in the north. Iran is on the verge of nuclear weapons capability and spinning centrifuges even as we gather here today. And so for me, I want to fight for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. I come from a background where my family were refugees rescued by the state of Israel. My mother, who's here, was rescued by Israel from Iraq, where she fled. My stepfather was here, fled Nazi-occupied Bulgaria, and my father-in-law, communist Romania. They all served in the IDF, and I want to do my part for a safer Israel.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank Civic Care and Beth Jacob for hosting this event, as well as there are over 20 other Jewish organizations who are sponsoring this event as well. As you know, I am not Jewish. No one's perfect. But I do believe one of the greatest responsibilities of a member of Congress is America's national security. And our national security is inextricably linked to the security of Israel. And I believe the greatest threat facing Israel today is a nuclearized Iran. That's why in 2007, as a member of the state legislature, I was a principal co-author of California's law to divest our pension funds in Iran's nuclear and energy industries. 2010, I was a co-author of a law that told companies if they invest in Iran's energy sectors, they cannot contract with the state of California. I was a co-author of a third law that was heavily opposed by every insurance company that said if you invest in Iran's energy sectors, you cannot count that towards your capital market requirements. I have led on this issue, and as a member of Congress, I'll continue to lead on this issue. I also believe growing our economy is extremely important. I went through the recession years of 2007, 8, 9, and 10, and I'll review in the state legislature was cutting and slashing, and forget about all the programs that we value over here. We can't sustain any of them if we don't have a growing economy. So I believe we need to grow our economy and create more jobs. And California is in a better position now. Just a few months ago, we passed an on-time balanced budget. We have now placed over $2 billion in reserves. We've paid down over $12 billion of our debt. We'll be largely debt-free by 2020. We've reinvested over $10 billion into education. We have now recovered all our job loss since the recession. This past year, California outpaced the federal government's average in job growth. In August, last month, which we had data, California created more jobs than any other state in the union. And we need to sustain that momentum, and as a member of Congress, I continue to fight to make sure that we have the appropriate tax credits to incentivize the industry to compete in, and also make sure that we give businesses the opportunity to do well, because if you don't do well, the government doesn't do well. I look forward to answering any questions now.
Thank you, Ted. Let's start with you. Talk for a few minutes, focus on college campuses. Jewish students and other supporters of Israel here at UCLA, UC Berkeley, across the country, New York University, even Brooklyn College, feel increasingly threatened by aggressive anti-Israel campaigners, including some of them are open supporters of Hamas, who label Israel an apartheid state. Many of these students often experience a sense of intimidation from teachers who excoriate Zionism, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. So here we are on February 1st, 2015, Mr. Congressman. You're now the district's representative. I've got a two-part question for you. Number one, what part of this issue would you say is protected speech, freedom of speech? And number two, more specifically, what role, if any, do you have in addressing these issues with the Secretary of Education in Washington, the UC Board of Regents in Sacramento, with other members of the 140th Congress? Please do.
I find the BDS movement offensive and factually totally wrong. I have taken action on this issue as a member of the state legislature. I co-authored a letter to our UC regents asking them to do more on our college campuses in California to mitigate this issue. A couple months ago, the BDS movement and protesters went to the ports of Long Beach and LA and tried to block an Israeli flag vessel from unloading. And I wrote a letter commending our longshore workers for ignoring that protest and unloading the cargo. And to me, the BDS movement, let's call it what it is, it's anti-Semitism. It is bigotry. Now, in America, we let people say bigoted things. But if that crosses over to harassment or bullying, then you can take action, I believe, on campuses. I also believe if any of this results in actual crimes, we should strengthen our hate crimes laws. As a member of Congress, I've worked with all the nonprofit organizations, as well as their UC Board of Regents and college chancellors, to look at ways to mitigate this on college campuses and to really try to address the issue. The reason it's so important, earlier this year I attended the APAC dinner in Los Angeles, and Elliot Brandt, then Western Region Director, said something very interesting. He said, APAC is going to lose sleep at night over America's support for Israel today. APAC loses sleep over America's support for Israel 30 years from now. It's a changing demographic, and some of these very college students right now are going to be likely in positions of influence. So you've got to stop this right now, and as a member of Congress, I would work with you and work with stakeholders, and would be one of my top issues.
Thank you. I might come back to you and finish with this cycle, but I'd like to repeat the questions for you, Mark. What part of this crisis, let's call it on campus, even if it is manufactured. What segment of this is protected speech, which limits what anyone can do, including someone who used to sit in congressman, freshman in Congress? What role, if any, do you have in addressing these issues with the Secretary of Education in Washington, with the UC Board, and with other members of the 140?
Well, if you look at university regulations regarding political correctness, they're a lot more aggressively enforced than university regulations governing harassment of pro-Israel students. I have a track record of combating BDS in a very personal way. The last 2 years, I've been serving as the international president of API, and I've worked with literally, we have 9,000 students on 180 campuses. And what's going on campus today is nothing short of appalling. In one case, a student handed me a math assignment that a TA gave him, and it was, the integral of this and the derivative of that, and then in the middle it said another day in the occupied territories, a genocide by Israeli forces, and then it went back to math, and he handed me this, one of the many API members, and he said, in math class, I can't get away from this, in math class, that's what's going on. This is a climate, a hostile climate on college campuses, and it is anti-Semitism, and it's got to stop. Now, how to stop it? First of all, enforce the regulations that universities have, certainly in terms of what is said in the classroom, certainly in terms of harassing students, apartheid walls and checkpoints and yelling at students going into campuses, which is happening on a regular basis. That can't be tolerated, and there are regulations already in place to do that. And a member of Congress ought to stand up and demand of university administrators to do that. But then second of all, even with respect to the aspect of which is protected from speech, and of course, people aren't obligated to like Israel, and they can say that, but the fact of the matter is, a member of Congress ought to be a voice. And nothing stops members of Congress and other leaders from going from campus to campus and saying this is outrageous, these views are outrageous. And certainly I think if anti-Israel students have protected speech, I think the member of Congress does as well. And that speech should be heard loud and clear for the sake of the pro-Israel movement on college campuses across the country.
Thank you. Let me come back. Both of you, just to fine-tune this a little bit. There are activists, chief among them, Tammy Benjamin, who's a professor, a teacher up north, Northern California, who's trying her best to go around trying to get protection under civil rights statutes, under Title VI, and other relevant areas of law, and bureaucracy have to do with protected classes. I know this is maybe first time maybe hearing it, but the question also might be, since we want to bring up and have a little bit of a bully pulpit, but might there also be some specific things with the Secretary of Education who gives out many millions of dollars in grants every year to many programs, including those dealing with the Middle East, and also in the arena of civil rights. Do you see any additional role for the Congress, or is this a battle that has to be fought out primarily on the ground with people like yourselves helping from the sidelines? Please.
Again, I believe that you can work with the stakeholders, be a bully pulpit, you can try to mitigate things on campus, but to pass a law that tries to define this and then stop it is extremely difficult because of the First Amendment. But you can work with all the groups and try to really solve this issue. And if it becomes bullying and harassment, then you can have the laws kick in, or if it becomes hate crime, you can use that. And under Title VII and Title VI as well, religion is a protected class. And so if you can start having lawsuits fall into that area, then you might start to have some victories. And I know that ADL and other groups are looking at doing that. It is a difficult issue.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. When Harvard University wouldn't allow ROTC to recruit on campus, the federal government said, we're not going to give you a grant. You're going to lose your federal funding if you're going to do that. And of course, we then back down. I think it is absolutely appropriate to condition federal monies on protecting students. Not on squelching free speech, but on protecting students. And I think that's absolutely appropriate. There are some successes. For example, Professor Finkelstein was denied tenure, and there was a big heated debate, rabid anti-Semitic, because we don't know, he was successfully denied tenure and eventually left the home. So there are successes, and those things can happen, and I think there should be pressure.
One last question having to deal more generally domestically. We have two very well-versed individuals to address this issue. As you know, in the state of California, over the course of the last 30 years, the number one group that's targeted for hate crimes based on race are African Americans. And with the exception of 3 months after 9/11, the number one group targeted for religious-based attacks are Jews. Do you see domestically, are there any moves as Congressman that you would support to better protect Jews, African Americans, and other minority groups from the scourge of hate crimes?
Absolutely. In the state legislature, I've supported hate crimes legislation numerous times. As a racial minority myself, I am very sensitive to these issues. And keep in mind, in America, one of the worst things this country did in the 20th century is we forcibly interned over 100,000 Americans who happen to look like me, who happen to be Japanese American, who happen to be Chinese American. And so we have a history in America of way overreach. And I believe the member of Congress needs to be strong and to make sure that we respect everyone's rights, whether it's based on religion, race, gender. And that's what I do as a member of Congress.
Well, we absolutely have to protect minorities. And I have personal experience with this as a prosecutor. I enforce the laws of California. And in fact, I very recently just prosecuted a hate crime. It was a horrendous crime against an African-American man who was threatened with murder because of his status and epithets that you could well imagine were used in the course of the crime. I prosecuted that defendant, very proud to prosecute that defendant. And so we do need to vigorously protect minorities. We had an incident very close to here where Elan Carr, for those of you who know, you might have read the Jewish Journal article, Elan Carr was walking home with his kids and he was accosted by what appeared to be Arabs, and they yelled epithets at him and his children were hysterical. He said, I was with him just 2 nights ago, he said his kids are still having nightmares because they were accosted on the street in West Los Angeles, here, right here. And so we've got to be vigorous in protecting all minorities. I'm the son of immigrants, and the magic of America, the tapestry, the wonderful tapestry of this country, is the diversity that we have. And we have to treasure that diversity and protect that diversity.
Thank you. Let's go on to the global stage. And I think what I'll do here also, at your convenience, whenever you decide you want to address this, it'll be helpful for us to understand which committees, if you were given a choice as an incoming congressman from California, what the choice of committees would be. You can come to that and let your life, but before we have a meeting, I think it would be very helpful guidance to us. So the issue is global anti-Semitism. Dr. Manfred Gerstenfeld, who's a respected author and researcher, has written a book. He's concluded on the basis of analysis of some pretty serious polls taken in Germany and elsewhere, that in 2014, as many as 150 million Europeans harbor extreme anti-Jewish and or anti-Israel sentiments. Question number one, what tools as a congressman could you deploy to fight anti-Semitism abroad? Question number two, what role should the United States more broadly play in combating anti-Semitism around the world? And question number three, are you satisfied that the administration has done enough to push back on our NATO ally, Turkey's Prime Minister Erdogan, and unfortunately is showing extreme animus against Israel, and also uses anti-Semitic imagery? So I'm going to ask you first, and then I will repeat the question and detail on come back.
So I think one of the most pro-Israel members of Congress that we have, not members, is Elliot. And he is not shy about using his position as ranking member of Foreign Affairs. And that goes to your other question, because Foreign Affairs is one of the committees that I would want to serve on. As the ranking Democrat on Foreign Affairs, he pushes this issue everywhere he goes. And when he meets with foreign leaders, he says, what are you doing about your Jewish communities? And why are there synagogues being bombed? Why have you made these anti-Israel statements? And let's be clear, anti-Israel statements that are not really linked to some sort of intelligent review of policy is also anti-Semitic. And so he pushes it as a member of Congress. And he's not ashamed when he's in meetings with foreign leaders to pound the table and say, answer this trouble. And so I certainly think there's a role for a member of Congress to do that and to hold countries accountable for developments within their borders. With regard to Turkey, the administration is definitely not doing enough. This is a catastrophe. You've got a member of NATO that has drifted, I was going to say drifting, has drifted into the ambit of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the administration doesn't seem to be particularly worried about it. I don't see where the demand is that Turkey either stay a member of the West in terms of its views toward Western countries and its respect for Israel, or sacrifice its NATO membership. Same thing, you didn't mention Qatar. I spent 2 months in Qatar on my way to Iraq. When I deployed to Iraq, I spent nearly a year in Iraq. Qatar was a way station. We've got bases in Qatar the size of cities. Al Udeid Air Base is like a city in Qatar. What are we doing about the fact that they just funded a war against Israel? Nothing, as far as I see nothing. And so I think this is a big problem. We need to be far more forceful in holding countries to account for their behavior and far more forceful advocating for our interests. Because at the end of the day, these aren't just Israel's interests. They certainly are those, my goodness. But there are safety. We can't keep American families safe unless we are exercising leadership overseas. And wherever you look, whether it's Turkey or Qatar, or Syria or Iraq, or the spinning centrifuges of Iran, or Iran's ICBM program, the list goes on and on and on, we don't see vigorous American leadership abroad. And that has got to change. Because, I'm an optimist, and we're going to talk about domestic issues. We can fix so many of our problems. If we come together and make the right decisions, whether it's borders, or schools, or the economy, or healthcare, we can fix these. You know what you can't fix? A nuclear war. You can't fix that one. If that happens, God forbid, we can never take that back. And we can never protect our country and never protect Israel the extent to which we could today. And so this is a critical issue. We've got to lead overseas. We've got to be strong in dealing with countries that threaten us and threaten Israel. And we've got to do it today before it's too late. Thank you.
Basic questions, but also we're in February. So you're a congressman now, and you also have 24 hours in a day. And so let's try to be as specific as possible. Number one, what tools is the congressman to deploy to fight anti-Semitism abroad? Number two, what role should the United States more broadly play on the international scene to combat anti-Semitism? And number three, are you satisfied with the administration record in pushing back, especially on our NATO ally, leader Erdogan, his extreme anti-Israel animus? And since he was already raised, the United States government Qatar, which funds some wonderful, really great cultural things in the United States, and also is the main paymaster of Hamas.
First thing I would do is fight for funding for the Office of the Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism. That is an office in the State Department. We need to increase their staff. We need to give them more authority. We need to go out and combat anti-Semitism. And the other thing we need to do, so Ali Engel is amazing what he does. And yet there's rising anti-Semitism. Why don't we bring in more countries into this? There are a lot of countries that we can get engaged into this issue. There are a lot of countries, for example, in Asia, that are very aware of American power protecting them, such as South Korea or Taiwan or other places. Let's get them engaged. Let's get different demographics engaged to stand up and say anti-Semitism is evil, it is wrong, we need to stop it. And as a member of Congress, I will be saying that. I'll be saying that as your member of Congress, as representing this district, but also because it's something I've been saying. It's the right thing to do, and we need to get more people engaged, more stakeholders engaged, because if we don't do that, then we're going to continue to see rising anti-Semitism, as you see now, because clearly what's happening now is not stopping. So let's get much more folks engaged in this and call it what it is. On Turkey, I have a different view than both this administration and the prior administration, I would just stop conflict. I have repeatedly voted, for example, the Armenian genocide resolution in the state legislature. I would vote for it in Congress. That would be completely unacceptable to the country of Turkey, but guess what? It's the truth. We need to start speaking the truth. I would also be much stricter with Turkey when they do anti-Semitic things, such as the imagery and the words that they use, and call it what it is. And I don't think coddling Turkey has been perfectly good for the Middle East or for America. I would start switching both in tone and in action what we do towards the country of Turkey. In addition, I would make sure that if I am honored to be put on the Foreign Affairs Committee, then I would, every chance I can, fight for not just the state of Israel, but also to combat anti-Semitism. And so Foreign Affairs is an interesting committee for this district. A lot of people in this district care about how America relates to other countries. There's also other committees such as Judiciary. I want to see comprehensive immigration reform happen. That goes to that committee. There's a large entertainment presence in this sector. They care a lot about piracy, about trademark issues. So the Judiciary Committee is interesting. This district also has aerospace and defense assets. It has LA Air Force Base where we do reserve duty. So the Armed Services Committee would also be interesting to serve on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're coming to the next question, which you might be surprised about in a moment, but since you were both trying to allude to it explicitly mentioned, Iowa Fortin is the special envoy for the United States on anti-Semitism. As we speak, I think he's in Poland. This is a gentleman who's fighting the fight, leveraging his place, and I'm sure, you can't look at this district, but I'm sure he's going to be very happy when I call him, when he gets back to hear people talking about the fact that address, special envoy anti-Semitism, it's in the State Department, it only exists because of Congress. In fact, there might be more money, and muscle would be very good fit. So here's the exit question. You might be surprised by this, but when we were with the Pope a few months ago, Rabbi Heyer thanked Pope Francis for his outspokenness against anti-Semitism and used part of his 3 minutes to say that the Legal Center is reinforcing its commitment to stand up for religious minorities that are persecuted all over the world, including 190 million Christians. So, I know we're talking about global anti-Semitism, but the way things work in our democracy is we, of course, care about our family first. You've thought about this issue as a congressman in February. What would you do about the growing disasters for endangered Christians in Egypt, Iraq, Nigeria, for starters, 3 countries?
First of all, I support the U.S. airstrikes in Iraq to protect the Yazidis. I think it is remarkable we protected the Yazidis from genocide because of American air power. I would also continue to support U.S. airstrikes in Iraq, not only to protect the state of Iraq, but also protect all religious minorities within Iraq. It is something that as American hackers are continuing to fight because, keep in mind, when we have folks like ISIS, they don't just go after Jews, they go after everyone that is not their particular sect, and they kill them all. And as a member of Congress, I would support whatever the U.S. could do to reduce that threat and to protect our religious minorities.
Yeah, well, I think the United States has to lead in this. And the reason why Christians are more endangered now than they were never entirely safe in recent times. But the reason why they're more endangered now is because the United States has disengaged from the Middle East. And the results really speak for themselves. I mean, the regions aflame, and there's disaster. It's catastrophic. I worked with the Assyrian and Chaldean communities in Iraq. When I was there as an army officer, I led an anti-terrorist team in Iraq, and I had missions in those areas, and I worked with them. The problem is that we largely abandoned Iraq to Iran, and we largely abandoned the Syrian opposition to Assad to Iran. And Iran has become, of course, the dominant hegemon and the Sunnis have become more radicalized. Now, there was a radical element in the Sunni population to begin with, but the Sunnis that were moderate, including a moderate opposition to Assad in Syria, and a moderate Sunni presence that, by the way, a few short years ago, were working with the U.S. forces to fight Sunni terrorists. I mean, the Sunni awakening in Iraq was miraculous, with Sunni tribal chiefs working with the U.S. military against Sunni terrorists. We blew those relationships. And so Iran, having become the dominant force in the region, Sunnis have become radicalized and turned in Syria and Iraq to the cruelest entities that could fight Hezbollah or the Iran's proxies in Iraq. And so that's why the Christians are in danger. That's why Israel is more in danger. That's why there's mass murder going on in Syria. That's why Mosul is fallen to ISIS. By the way, I led anti-terrorism missions in Mosul, so this is personally painful to me to see these regions fall to ISIS. What has to happen is we've got to get back to building those relationships with Sunnis. We have to get back to leading the Middle East. And again, we have to do this soon, or these problems will not be fixed.
Congressman, how would you deal with the defending ladies who are helping out the Christians who are right out of the...
So I answered that first. I answered that question first. Did you want to ask me this?
Okay. So I'd like to...
No, answer it again.
No, it's okay. I'd like to actually move on to a much easier topic, the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And what I'm going to try to do here with your help, I'm going to ask you to relatively short answers to a couple of questions, and then at the end of that time, we'll give you each 2 minutes more to say anything you want about the Israel-Palestine conflict. So let's work on the specifics that we have. Here's, I think, relatively easy yes or no question. Do you support a two-state solution?
I do. I support a two-state solution of Jewish state and a Palestinian state.
You want?
I support a two-state solution only if that two-state solution results from negotiations between the two parties and would include a comprehensive end to the conflict and would not involve U.S. pressure on Israel to accept terms that it doesn't want to accept.
The next question, the bullet question, of course. I wrote about an hour before the very disturbing story came out today about some name calling against the Israeli Prime Minister, because we don't want to sit and log, I won't refer to it specifically, but if you want to talk to me about it, then the highest quote, I'll remind you later on. Having said that, how would you characterize the current state of U.S.-Israel relations, and what do you do to improve it?
I think it can always be better, but during their recent conflict, Congress did vote to expand Iron Dome funding.
The members of the Obama administration used a 4-letter word to describe the Prime Minister of Israel. I said the same thing when the George H.W. Bush administration, the Secretary of State, used a 4-letter word to describe the situation in Israel. I think it's contemptible. Now, I think, you don't have to like every foreign leader. The President of the United States doesn't have to get along with every leader of our friends. But my goodness, friendship is friendship. And you don't treat friends that way. And when you've got a democratically elected leader of a country that is your best friend in the world, right, and the U.S.-Israel relationship has got to be that relationship based on the closest kind of cooperation, real friendship. And you don't do that. And so I'm deeply concerned that statements like that will further alienate Israelis who, frankly, having endured this past year, feel more alone and more isolated than ever. And at a time like this, when the kind of dangers Israel confronts, they shouldn't feel alone. They should feel that the United States is 100% behind the state of Israel, unequivocally and strongly. And so I've said very publicly in this campaign that the U.S.-Israel relationship has got to be a central feature of our foreign policy.
Time for the next 2 questions. As a new congressman, would you bring up or co-sponsor a resolution for the United States to sponsor Israel as a NATO member? And the second question is, should the United States recognize West Jerusalem as part of the state of Israel? Congressman. West Jerusalem. West Jerusalem. The current, since 1948, United States policy has been to not recognize any part of Jerusalem as a sovereign piece of the state of Israel. So my question, just to be reality-based, is if we're talking about West Jerusalem, which started in 1948 onwards, and right now is not recognized by the United States as being part of sovereign state of Israel. These are the two. One is more practical question on NATO. The other is more symbolic about West Jerusalem. As Congressman in February 2015, how do you deal with the practical and symbolic?
So on the first one, yes, I would support Israel becoming a member of NATO. The second question, I would do what I can to try to go to a two-state solution. I do believe that to get there, we need to have the two parties engage in bilateral negotiations. We should not have pressure from the United States, but the United States can facilitate. There's some interesting things that happened recently. I think other countries can get involved and help out. Keep in mind that this last ceasefire was not brokered by the United States. It was brokered by Egypt. And Egypt can play a more prominent role to try to get the two parties together. But ultimately, demographically, I think having a two-state solution, a Jewish state and Palestinian state, is what is going to have lasting peace in the region. And that's how I would think about the issues that you just asked about. I think it's helpful to that at that moment in time, and I would support it. If I think it's not helpful, then I likely will not support it.
Thank you.
So I don't know of a proposal to make Israel a member of NATO. I've not heard that that's being discussed. Certainly I would support it, but I've not heard that being discussed. So I don't think that's on the horizon. With regard to Jerusalem, of course we should. Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. It is the eternal capital of the Jewish people for 4,000 years. I would force the State Department to list Jerusalem as being Israel, which for some inexplicable reason it does not do today. People born in Jerusalem are not listed as being born in Israel. Amazingly rather. I would force the State Department to move our embassy to Jerusalem immediately. The reason why that's so important is because we don't advance the peace process to the extent that there is one. We don't advance it by engaging in fantasy. And the United States has been engaging in fantasy for years with regard to the contours of Israel, its borders, and its capital. That doesn't serve anybody. Negotiations have to be based on truth. The historical claims we have on land, the historical claims that Palestinians have on some parts of the land, also that has to be recognized. But you don't build negotiations on fantasy. Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people of the state of Israel. It's high time the United States said so and acted on it. We owe it to our Lord.
Next question, which I'm going to give you expanded time, not just to answer your question, but to talk more generally in filling out your approach on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And again, please answer it as a congressman. Ted, one of the great things about Southern California, as we all know, we're the second city for every conceivable national, ethnic, and religious group on the planet. We're very proud of that. As Congressman, how would you in your office deal with constituents and constituent groups who question Israel's right to exist?
Oh, I would tell them that they're wrong. I told them that they're wrong. If you look at my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed, I have had arguments with people on this issue, and ultimately I always tell them to just go read the charter of Hamas, because you know it says not only do they want to destroy Israel, they want to kill every Jew. And to me, it is unacceptable that people have that view. I would use the office as a holy public to condemn any groups that have those views and that assert those views, and I've had a record of doing so in the state legislature.
You're the congressman, you're supposed to have your door open to everyone. The Northern constituents that are well organized and become more organized. groups that kind of have to feel about the Middle East future? How do you deal with it?
You know, people show their leadership not when it's easy, but when it's tough. Now, I happen to think it's not tough at all to reject anybody who suggests that Israel doesn't have a right to exist or is anti-Israel in any way. I do that on a regular basis now, and I would certainly do that as a member of Congress. But more broadly than simply that, when you have constituents making certain demands, when you have organizations approaching you and seeking to have a relationship with you that are unsafe, when you have donors, by the way, it's a big issue. You have donors who say, well, I'd really like you to vote a certain way, behave a certain way. Now, you always should listen. But again, leadership is about saying no when it's wrong and standing up for what's right and fighting for what's right. When I got to Iraq, I noticed that there was a list of services posted in the presidential palace of Saddam Hussein by the chaplain. It was Catholic Mass on Sunday, Protestant worship on Sunday, and Shiite and Sunni. It was very ecumenical, but there was something missing. So I went to the chaplain and I said, I was a little irritated. He was a colonel, I was a lieutenant at the time. I said, sir, there are no Jewish services. Is there a reason for that? He said, yeah, there's a reason for it. I know when to leave it. Can you leave it? I want you to know, people said to me, don't do it. It's dangerous enough for you to be a U.S. military officer in Iraq. Don't do it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. It's the right thing to do it. And so I had the privilege of leading Shabbat services. By the way, we had a minyan every week in the former presidential palace of Saddam Hussein. And you know what? Was it tough? Was it a little scary? Was it a little risky? Yes. But you know what? If we're not willing to take those risks, if we're not willing to stand up for what's right, why run for office at all? We run for office to make the country better first, and that's our win.
Thank you. So I'm looking at about at least 20 questions in the audience. We still have a couple of more issues to plow through. Hopefully we'll cover many of those questions. Terrorism. Earlier today, the United States government announced to enhance security measures to thousands of federal buildings around the United States. So, Congressman, February 1st, please grade U.S. efforts to fight terrorism at home and abroad. Just give me a letter, and you can talk that includes Homeland Security, FBI, local police. First, just give us a snapshot of how you think you're doing.
So I would say, and I have to separate the domestic and overseas. I think the climates are very different, the tactics are very different. I think domestically, we certainly could do a better job, but I think there have been real successes, remarkable successes. And we know directly of terrorist attacks that are frustrated, thanks to the Department of Homeland Security, and thanks, I have to say, to the NYPD, which has the most sophisticated anti-terrorism organization at the local level in the country. And as somebody who led an anti-terrorism team in a war zone, I particularly appreciate how successful NYPD has been in preventing terrorist attacks. And our federal government has to a large extent as well. I think we could do better. We're going to talk about, I think you said we're going to talk about immigration. My fear in not securing our borders is that the next, God forbid, mass casualty terrorist attack is going to walk across the border. And so I see border security, by the way, this has been terribly politicized. Border security is not an immigration issue. Border security is a public safety issue. Incidentally, a month ago, 2 months ago, had to stop my campaign to prosecute a murder. Literally, in the middle of my campaign, I prosecuted a murder. That murderer had been deported, came back into the country, and shot the victim twice in the face. And we know what just happened in California with 2 police officers who were killed by someone who had been deported. But my fear is that if we don't secure our borders, we're exposed to terrorism as well. And so I can't give us a very high rate, because as long as we maintain porous borders, we are future. Overseas, I give us a death. Because in the last few years, to abandon the Middle East, to grant terrorism the kinds of victories we have granted terrorism through our flight from Iraq, from our refusal to support a moderate opposition to Syria, from our statement that, my goodness, if you use chemical weapons, it's a red line, and there's mass murder going on, including by using chemical weapons, we don't do anything about it. We are sending a message to our enemies that we are weak, and the surest way to bring terrorism is to grant it victories.
Please grade the U.S. efforts to fight terrorism at home and abroad.
So I also make the distinction between both at home and abroad. At home, we've done a relatively good job, but the federal government is also very susceptible to overreach when it comes to national security issues. And I support what the NSA does most of the time, but they run programs that are just flat out unconstitutional. They have run this program called the bulk collection program, where they have seized every American's phone records, including yours, for the last 7 years. They know who you called, who called you, the duration of those calls, when they were made. That just violates the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which says government shall not engage in unreasonable search and procedures unless they were born. NSA doesn't. I author a law that government signed, joint author with the Republican senator from San Diego, that basically tells the state of California to not cooperate with NSA when they try to seek private and unconstitutional data on you. So I fully support terrorism efforts and totally violates the U.S. Constitution. As a member of Congress, the oath we take is the first and highest order that we have, and that is the Constitution. Abroad, the Constitution does not apply. I support anything the United States can do to reduce terrorism abroad. I support any program that will eliminate terrorists. And keep in mind that we have to understand a lot of this, and I trust the first George Bush when he didn't invade Iraq, when it was 45 minutes away and could. And he said we didn't know what to do if you took out Saddam Hussein, that he was powerful. Unfortunately, the second George Bush didn't listen to his father, did a power vacuum, and now we're in a big mess in Iraq. So, as a member of Congress, I'm also very skeptical of massive American military intervention. You can't answer the next question, which is, what do we do next?
Let me ask the next question on terrorism. Maybe again, one you didn't anticipate. Can you describe for us any scenario where you would support negotiating with terrorists?
Well, I cannot conceive of it, but if an atomic device were secreted in an American city and unsavory practices would have to be employed to discover it and save potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans. Would I negotiate in the short term to discover its location? Yes. Would I be willing to actually engage in other practices that I might not want to engage in to discover that location? I think it's a government's job to do that. But I cannot imagine a situation short of something that extreme and that dangerous where I would negotiate with terrorists. And the reason is very simple. Because it's not just that particular issue and that particular window of time. A negotiation with terrorists is giving them power and allowing them to obtain leverage. And if you allow them to obtain leverage, they're going to continue engaging in the same dangerous behavior, taking the same hostages if it's a hostage. I mean, we all know what they do. They're going to continue and continue and continue to squeeze as much as we can. And we see that with Israel. Israel is, my heart goes out to the Prime Minister of Israel, who has to make the decision of releasing terrorists with blood on their hands to get back Israeli capital. And you want to do it every day. You want to help them. But then you think, well, how many more captives will there be because of that action? It's excruciating. It's an excruciating decision. And my heart goes out to people who are put in that position because of terrorists. Terrorists put us in that position. And that's why I'm loath to grant them any victories. And my MO in government would be, do not grant terrorists victories, period.
Like Elan said, it's hard to think of every possible scenario that could potentially happen in the future. I would never say never, but it's pretty close to never.
Thank you. We're now going to move. We have a technical. We're now going to move to our last segment. We're going to come back primarily to domestic. And the last three issues that we'll be talking about are foreign immigration related issues, Secondly, employment/economy. And third, education. Those are the last three. And following that, we will dive back in. But just before we go there, they covered it somewhat. I will ask you, I'll try to limit the Iran question into one question for both of you, that I promise will come to the domestic issues. I don't know how many people here recognize the name Rehana Jabari. She was a 26-year-old Iranian woman who was just executed for trying to oppose and allegedly killing the men who raped her. She was the one who was executed just a few days ago. She was arrested in 2007, placed in solitary confinement for 2 months, allegedly tortured, sentenced to death in 2009, and recently executed. Point number 2 are the ongoing negotiations about Iran's nuclear program that allegedly have to come to some tipping point by November 24th. That date may or may not be pushed off. I'm going to ask when you talk to that part of the issue, you have input directly into the American negotiating position. What do you tell the American negotiations? What are the red lines? And third is, do you support regime change in Iraq? So, human rights in Iran, nuclear issue, and do you support, as Congressman, regime change in Iran?
Yes, I support regime change in Iran. I think the human rights record has been a travesty. It is one of the worst human rights records of any country. As a member of Congress, I will continue to highlight it, and I would advocate forcefully for regime change. On the nuclear weapons issue, I still continue to believe that it is the greatest threat facing Israel, is the nuclearized Iran. There is a concept called nuclear breakout capability, which is how quickly could a country actually get a nuclear weapon based on the number of centrifuges that they have. Right now, Iran has an order of 30,000 centrifuges, which is quite a lot. They could build a nuclear weapon rather quickly. If there is any agreement at all between the U.S. and Iran and other nations, they've got to destroy most of those centrifuges. As a member of Congress, I would force the agreement to be voted on, and if those centrifuges are not good enough or destroyed, I would not support it.
Well, I don't know why anyone would say they need to destroy most of the centrifuges. I mean, how many centrifuges are enough centrifuges? How much enrichment of uranium is comfortable for Israel? The answer is zero. There should be no centrifuges. There should be no enrichment of uranium. There should be no ballistic missile program. And there should be no plutonium trap to nuclear weapons. And that is the red line, because anything else is to expose us and Israel to danger. By the way, they're working on ICBMs. It's not just Israel. They're working on missiles that can deliver nuclear payloads to America. And so from my standpoint, this is a no-brainer. By the way, one does not need to enrich uranium. A country does not need to enrich uranium to have a peaceful nuclear program. That deal was offered to a number of countries, and a number of countries are doing it, where nuclear fuel is delivered to the country, they run reactors under supervision, and spent fuel is then taken out of the country. Iran was offered that deal. They turned it down because they don't want a peaceful nuclear program. By the way, they have some oil, you might have heard. So they don't need nuclear energy. They're doing it because they want nuclear breakout capability. They want the ability to have nuclear weapons. And that cannot be allowed to happen. There is no greater danger facing the United States and Israel. And we have got to get tough on Iran. And what we're doing now in terms of rolling back sanctions on Iran currently, when they're continuing to enrich uranium, when, to answer the human rights question, they're executing Iranians currently while we are relieving sanctions pressure from them. They're committing for Hezbollah mass murder in Syria. They're destabilizing Iraq, and we're relieving sanctions pressure. I don't understand the logic of it. I think it is dangerous. And I would have a much tougher view to Iran in terms of the negotiations, and I would also keep the military option on the table in a clear way, not in the equivocal way it has been made, but to make very clear that the United States will not allow Iran to continue to approach nuclear weapons capability.
2 minutes. I mean, I know that you're both very well versed in these issues. So, in your response, if you would include and prioritize the following issues: secure borders. Is amnesty an option for undocumented / illegals? And we would expand or limit legal immigration. And you look out at this audience, you think about our individual and collective histories here. When you talk about immigration to the United States, we are all, I think, pretty much everyone here, I think I see one person who's on the Mayflower, but besides that, this is also a very profoundly emotional issue for American Jews as well. So, you want to start?
Neither candidates came on the Mayflower, I can assure you. I told you the story about a murder that I just prosecuted, where that defendant had been deported, came back, shot the victim twice in the face. I just prosecuted that case. A year ago, I prosecuted a young man for attacking a police officer while threatening to murder him and claiming his gang, a very violent gang that had actually killed the police officer. That young man had been deported, are you ready for this? 7 times. Now, we have got to be crazy doing this. And that's why I say that border security is not an immigration issue. Border security is a public safety issue. And by the way, the violence from street gangs affects immigrants first. The number of immigrants that have been subjected to gang violence is staggering. And so we've got to secure our borders. On the other hand, we have to make America, keep America friendly to immigrants. My parents are here, and my in-laws are here. 4 people, not one of them is an American born. They're all naturalized Americans. They're all immigrants. And so we've got to make America friendly to immigrants. Let me tell you another story. I told you 2 stories, bad stories. Let me tell you a story about an illegal family. Family snuck across the border, came into the country. They were dirt poor, homeless. They wandered the vineyards of California's migrant farmers. When their son turned 17, they bought a Corps recruiting station. And they said, this country gave us a chance at a life. You're going to now pay back. And they signed him up to be a Marine. That young Marine eventually went to college, became an Army officer, and retired a year ago as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I know that man very well because he trained me in the Army. He's my mentor, he's my superior officer, and he taught me how to be the officer I am. And so, while yes, we need to secure our borders, we also got to have a humane and sensible approach to the undocumented residents who are here, who are decent, patriotic, law-abiding people. And yes, it should be legalized status, and yes, it should eventually be citizenship. And the only thing I'll add is a guest worker program as well, which we need for businesses to come and hire people who can come temporarily.
Thank you. Ted, I want to give you a little bonus of additional 30 seconds. If you'd flesh out for us your image, and that means that if you want to include two familial stories, we're all ears. Jewish people love, and besides, the rabbi has a sermon to prepare for Shabbat. And I know he's already got one, but he's got to be balanced, so we're all ears.
So I'm going to tell my story. Like many of you, I am an immigrant, and I was thinking when my parents looked at a map of America, they could have picked beautiful California or Hawaii. They picked Cleveland, Ohio. So that's where I grew up. And we were poor. My parents did not speak English well. We went to flea markets to sell gifts to make ends meet. They worked hard for several years, eventually opened one gift store in the shopping plaza and then one gift store in the shopping mall. And then my brother and I would help watch that store because we were free labor. And then eventually they expanded to 6 stores. And so in my mind, they achieved the American dream. They went from being poor to a home, gave my brother and I an amazing education. And it is one reason I joined the United States Air Force on active duty, because I believe I can never give back to America everything this amazing country has given to me. One reason I choose to remain in the reserves. I am 19 years in, I'm a lieutenant colonel at Los Angeles Air Force Base. It's also one reason I support comprehensive immigration reform, which is the U.S. Senate's package that passed the Senate. And keep in mind how hard it's been to pass anything in the Senate. Well, they passed this package and addresses all 3 questions that you mentioned. It increases border security. It also provides a pathway to citizenship for the people who are already here, and it increases the number of H-1B visas and other visas to allow highly skilled, highly trained workers in computer science and other fields so that companies in America can fill the open positions that they have right now so that they can continue to prosper. As a member of Congress, I would continue to fight to get that bill to a floor vote, because if it was put to a floor vote in the House of Representatives, it would pass with bipartisan support. And it would be one of my highest priorities is to get comprehensive immigration reform done in America.
Thank you. Okay, so one tough exit question for really two outstanding presentations, as reflected in a few of the questions that were submitted. And that is the idea of amnesty for people who broke the law, some of whom, or many of whom, did not pay taxes, some of whom may be criminals. How do you square those concerns with the need for a humane approach? We're asking our next congressman, if you can, just give us 30 seconds on some practical context to how you would approach the issue of amnesty.
So I would certainly say citizenship shouldn't be handed out immediately. They should first register and get a legalized status, that is an interim status, and then work their way up to citizenship. But here's the thing. I don't condone people breaking the law. I'm a prosecutor. I don't condone families coming into this country illegally. But let's be honest. We're the ones who need to secure our borders. That's our job. We're maintaining these porous open borders that people can walk in and out of. And the country has, to use a legal term, a tort term, an attractive nuisance. We're becoming an attractive nuisance in the sense that we have these open borders and prosperity, and we're dangling that prosperity and that chance to people who are coming across the border. Now, I don't condone it, I don't excuse it, but my goodness, are we now then going to hypocritically say, well, scandal, how could they do such a thing? How could we not have real borders? That's my question. So I think they should have legalized status.
Ted?
I saw this great political cartoon in the LA Times earlier this year. It was a alleged fence at the border, and there's a big sign that said keep out, and then right next to it, it was come in, help needed. So it is a great contradiction that we have, but I think the reason that Elan and I both agree on the amnesty issue is we're dealing with reality, which is you cannot deport millions and millions of people who are here already. And the way to stop that from happening in the future is to increase our border security, of which I will do.
Thank you. Let's move on now to an issue of sort of the baseline issue for everyone, the employment and economy. Are we headed in the right direction on the economy? Is California getting its fair share of the taxes that we pay? Number three, this is an easy one, guys. Healthcare, Obamacare, the plus or minuses. Of course, I didn't get my smicha for nothing, you know. And I'll go back on each of these, don't worry. And number four, as a congressman, what's your plan to help get back companies that left the state and continue to leave in significant numbers? So let me go back to the first. I'm going to start with Ted this time. Is the economy headed in the right direction? Number two, are we getting our fair share of taxes? And if not, Congressman, what are you doing to change that? Obamacare and getting businesses back to California.
It is true that companies leave California. It's also true that companies enter California. When you net the two out, California outpaced the federal average in job employment creation this past year. And last August, we created more jobs than any other state in the union. The way we continue to do that is by incentivizing our competitive advantages. Things we can do better than other states or other countries. We're never going to compete in California or America making socks. I hope none of you actually do that. But our cost of living is too high, or land value is too expensive. We can compete in industries where we can provide and add a value to that product or service that makes someone want to buy it. So for example, we have a very robust high-tech and aerospace industry. It's one reason that I supported and the governor signed an aerospace tax credit this year that will basically guarantee the Air Force's next generation bomber will be built in California, because China is never going to build that bomber. I also was a co-author of the Film and TV Production Tax Credit Expansion Bill. We know for every film and TV production we keep in California, we get all these ripple effects to caterers and dry cleaners and so on. And I believe that's how we succeed. As a member of Congress, I would look at tax credits for film and TV production to also keep those productions within America, because we're also losing those productions to countries like Australia, New Zealand, and England. On the issue of taxes, California, unfortunately, is a massive donor state. It's something I would keep fighting for to reverse. For every tax dollar we send to the federal government, we get about 80 cents back in services. States like South Dakota get $1.25, which means that the state and local folks end up having to backfill that discrepancy. Under President Clinton, it was nearly a 1-for-1. So I would try to go back to that time period and really reduce the discrepancy that California faces. And in terms of how the economy is going overall in California, it is doing better slowly. And that's why I think we need to focus really on these industries where we can compete. For example, we've got ports, right? California, America has ports. Switzerland's never going to have a port. We've got travel and tourism. In this congressional district, more people visit Venice and Santa Monica than Disneyland. And if we can incentivize these areas, that's how we succeed, that's how we compete.
Obamacare?
I support Obamacare, but there are clearly problems with it that need to be fixed. California disproportionately benefited from the Affordable Care Act. We had over 6 million uninsured folks. With one law, half of them have now been insured. That's a pretty remarkable step, but clearly there are problems with implementation and other issues where certain folks are hit pretty hard, and I would work to try to fix the law and not repeal it.
Thank you. Let me be fair to Elan, unless, if you can remember all the questions, then you should have become a rabbi a long time ago. We're talking about employment and economy. Are we headed in the right direction? Fair share of taxes for California, Obamacare, and what do we do about getting businesses to come to California?
Yeah, I don't think we're headed in the right direction. We're in an anemic, sluggish economy. Unemployment in California is close to 8%. Youth unemployment is double that, and minority unemployment is catastrophic. And so I don't think anyone thinks that things are humming along as they should be. And why is that? That's the next question. And why is our economy sluggish nationally? Well, it's not because we haven't radically spent, right? There's this injection of deficit spending into the economy. It's not because interest rates are high, they're close to zero. So how could it be that despite all of these artificial stimulants, we're still limping along year after year? The reason is because we're suffocating the life out of our private sector. That's the reason. Until we have a tax and regulatory structure that encourages economic growth, that encourages job creators, that encourages businesses to come back to California and start in California. It's not just socks. It's Hollywood is leaving, right? You can't think of something more emblematic than Hollywood shooting in Louisiana and Georgia and Canada. High tech is leaving. The Silicon Valley, high tech companies are seeking to leave. By the way, an example from down the street. Big success story, big commerce. Its founders are from Santa Monica. They didn't start in Santa Monica. They started in Austin. They moved to Austin to start this company because you can't do business here. And that's what's happening. There's a flight of high-tech and automotive and sector after sector to go anywhere but here. We've got to stop the bleeding. We've got to stop the bleeding. And the way to do that is to have a tax and regulatory infrastructure that makes sense. Now, between CEQA and our labor laws here and our tort climate in California, we are killing our job creators. We're killing them. And they're leaving. And that's got to change. And it's not just California. It's America. I mean, banks are suffocating. I have a friend of mine who's the CEO of a biomedical company. He was going to build a biomedical device manufacturing plant. He was going to put it here, but he put it in Ottawa. Because in America, there's a tax on biomedical devices. I mean, we've got to be crazy doing things like this. So we've got to change this. We have to have a climate that's friendly to business and job creators. That's number one. Number two, healthcare. My wife is a doctor. She practices walking distance from here, a few blocks away from where we sit tonight. And every day she sees am I done?
Yeah, we're pretty much done.
I was going to talk about Obamacare.
Next time. I have one extra question posed by the audience in a few different ways, but also appropriate to ask here in the synagogue because of Jewish tradition. What is your view on setting a higher minimum wage? Ted?
I support increasing the minimum wage and increasing it now. I would support the federal government's proposal to increase the minimum wage to $10.10. In the state legislature, I voted for the increase in California to go to $9 this year, $10 next year. I believe rising income inequality is a huge issue for America, and every study on the minimum wage, there's been 64 of them now, has shown that it actually increases the economy. We had this year 7 Nobel laureate economists who signed a letter saying, please raise the minimum wage because you will increase the economy. And as a member of Congress, I will fight to make sure that we increase the minimum wage and we do it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
I'm also very concerned with income disparities in America. 55% of college graduates, I'm not talking about laborers, 55% of college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. It's devastating. My concern is if we raise the minimum wage in an economy this sluggish, we're going to drive more people out of work. That's what's going to happen. Small businesses are simply not going to be able to hire at the same level, and they're going to hire fewer people. My feeling is, while I want everyone's wages to rise, I think the best one's wages rise is to have a growing economy. And you have to come back that you've got to grow the economy. And that will raise everybody's wages and living standards and bring down unemployment as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's come to the last official issue for tonight. It's a two-part question. I'll try to really simplify it. Part A is, please comment on the state of public education here in California. As Congressman, what will you do to improve that situation? And secondly, the second part, which you may or may not get this question elsewhere, but it reflects, I think, to the reality of many of the families here. Here in Southern California, there are many private Jewish day schools, and the cost to middle and working class families is a huge burden. So keeping those schools afloat and viable is important from the point of view of many people here to the entire community. And of course, if they were to implode, it would bring a rush of students back into the public school system that may not be even equipped to deal with it. It's February 1st, 2015. You're in your office. You get your first important delegation from Agudat Israel here in Southern California. They need help. They're middle class. Education is everything, and because of the specific needs and priorities of many Jewish families, it's a priority. I'm a product of that system. Is there any public dimension that a congressman should be promoting? So, public school first, the private school issue second. Huh?
This is my top domestic issue. As a gang prosecutor, I fight to keep people safe, but as we all know, public safety isn't about jail cells and handcuffs only. I get to know my defendants. I prosecute 17, 18, 19-year-old kids, and I put them away for more years than they've been alive on this earth. And I get to know them because that's my job. I know their backgrounds and I know their schools. And it breaks my heart. The human ruin that these kids grow up in breaks my heart. And every time I look at a young face in my courtroom and I hear those sentences 20, 30, 50 years, it devastates me. We have got to fix our schools in America. We've got to have classrooms that are ordered and disciplined. We have to have job training in the schools, after-school programs, universal preschool for America's kids, and we have to provide a nurturing environment because at the end of the day, kids join gangs. I know this firsthand. Kids join gangs because they want to feel nurtured. They want to feel peer acceptance. They want to feel importance. They want to feel love. We need to have nurturing schools. Currently, illiteracy rates are high. Illiteracy in America. How can we sleep at night knowing that, never mind nurturing kids, we're not teaching them how to read? And California is particularly bad in this. We have got to fix our schools. We are betraying an entire generation of Americans if we don't do this. And how would I do it? Number one, federal appropriations that are targeted and smarter, less wasteful, and that come with conditions, including elevated teacher salaries, preschool, after-school programs, and tenure reform, so that good teachers can be paid more. You can't do that today. That's crazy. So you have to have tenure reform as well. And so that's what I would do. And plus, aside from the federal side, pure federal side, I would work with local school districts to help California fix its schools.
Okay. I'm going to give you 15 more seconds, and I'll tack it on to your time as well, if you can talk about the private aspect.
I think I'll speak as a Jew now. We are pricing ourselves out of existence. What's happening now, my kids are in Jewish day school, we are pricing ourselves out of existence, and it's a disaster. Now, what should the public sector do about it? My fear is if we have school choice today, given the woeful system of so many of our public schools, it will drive people out of public school. We've got to fix our public schools first. I would have a limited choice environment among public schools. Once we fix our public schools, I would be much more open to allowing choice for
Thank you.
for
Ted?
fun.
Thank you. I'm a big believer of public education. That's why for the last 2 years I voted for and supported the increases to public education funding in California. This past year we increased K-12 funding by over $10 billion. Having said that, I believe we also often ask the wrong question in education, which is how smart is the kid, when we should be asking how is the kid smart? And we have a very peculiar view of education, which is we sit someone behind a desk 6 hours a day and lecture at them. There are so many children that can learn in very different ways, and technology provides a very interesting way to do this. You can have folks, for example, go home and start watching lectures at home on their video, on their iPad or their computer, and then they go into school the next day and they have a discussion about the topic they just read. In my son's 4th grade class, that's what the teacher did. You also have the ability for students to watch videos repeatedly to learn an issue. And there was this one student that wrote a letter to one of these nonprofit academies that provided these videos on English and math and so on. And the student said, "Thank you so much for doing that. I watched one of these videos 17 times, and then I got it." Well, no teacher or tutor could ever do that. The federal government has technology grants. There are appropriations that the federal government can provide to schools to better implement these technologies. But I'm also going to be honest with you, having been doing this for 9 years in state legislature, most of education is not done by federal government. Most of it is funded by the state, virtually all of it. Most of the policies are done by the state or your local school board. So there's only a very small amount the government can do, and unfortunately it's been messing it up. I think the No Child Left Behind was good intentions, but very poor execution. I think testing 2nd graders is stupid. That's why I voted for California's law to not do that anymore. And then let me switch to the second issue. I'm a big believer in religious education. I happen to have gone through a Jesuit high school. I went to a Jesuit law school. And the problem, if you have government start subsidizing or doing vouchers or start sort of paying for part of it, what's to keep government from 10 years later saying, now that people are so dependent on it, well, we're only going to start doing this if you teach the Common Core. Or we're only going to start doing this if you teach evolution, or anything that government can start mandating. And to me, that's a far greater danger. So I would not have government get involved in religious education.
Thank you very much. Okay, by a standard Jewish time, we have pretty much reached 9 p.m., which means it's past the hour and a half. I've tried to factor in quite a few of the written questions that came in. Not everything was handled. There's a great question about the Ukraine and Putin, which we didn't get to. The candidates have agreed to stay a little bit later and answer your questions that are brought forth politely. But I think right now, to be fair to them, they've been phenomenal tonight, is to ask for a closing comment. We're going to expand it each to 3 minutes maximum. If you come under 3 minutes, you'll probably gain a couple of extra votes here in the room. But if you want to use the full 3 minutes, I think we would all be very, very pleased to hear your perspectives. Just speaking personally, I learned a lot from both of you, especially in the education arena. A lot of interesting perspectives, nuances, had less to do about Republican and Democrat and more to do about personal and life values, which I think it reflects very well on both of our candidates. So I'd like to ask, since we're in February, Congressman Lieu, if you would first do the first. You want to finish up? You want to finish up, or you? Right, you get to call it. You want to finish up, or you want to be the first? Okay. All right, Mr. Congressman.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Cooper, and thanks to all of you for being here again. Full house, which is just terrific. It's great. Something you just said a moment ago. It's not about Republican or Democrat, and I want to close in part with that, and then I'll finish on Israel. Congress is totally dysfunctional. We talked about issues today. We touched on healthcare. We talked about borders. We talked about public safety. We talked about education and so on. And for all of these problems, real problems that we confront and that American families face, we look to our nation's capital in the frail hope of finding extrication from these problems. And what do we see? Total dysfunction. A broken capital, an inability to come together on seemingly anything and move our country forward. My campaign has never been about party or label. It's never been about blame. New York Times tried to bait me in an interview, and they said, well, you're a Republican, you're running against the president. I said, I don't care. I don't care to assess blame. There's plenty of blame, first of all, to go around for the mess we're in. I don't care. I care about how to get out of it. I care about the future. And so I'm not interested in pointing finger. Finger pointing is how we got into this mess in Washington and this toxic, caustic climate we see today. My campaign is about bipartisanship, and my aim is to reach across the aisle, bring people together, and move our country forward. My wife is a lifelong Democrat. We agree on 95% of the issues because there are oceans of common ground that bring us together. We have to stop bickering. I say we globally, but Congress, we have to stop the bickering. We have to come together for the sake of our kids, for the sake of the future they deserve to have. Lastly, about Israel. I am not a candidate that represents merely a reliable vote on Israel. Now, reliable votes, those are important, because as we saw in the Iran sanctions bill, votes that we thought were reliable proved to be less reliable than even AIPAC had thought. I don't represent merely a reliable vote. I represent leadership on Israel. I'm somebody who, like all of the departed from Congress, not from Earth, departed members of Congress, who were leaders and who aren't there anymore, Eric Cantor and Shelley Berkeley and Jane Harmon and wonderful leaders who are gone. Today, in these urgent times with the dangers we face, we need leaders. We need game changers in Congress. The kind of Congress people who are going to be able to lead those freshman trips to Israel and educate their colleagues. Now, I grew up speaking Hebrew. I grew up in an Israeli home. In 1996, I worked for the government of Israel and advised them on creating the first ever public defenders program in Israel. And then, leading an anti-terrorism team in Iraq, I saw up close and personal the dangers facing Israel and the United States from terrorism in the Middle East. I have the background that no member of Congress has, let alone candidate for Congress. And my aim would be to be a leader on the U.S.-Israel relationship in Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Congressman Lieu, if I'm correct, the 114th Congress begins around the 4th or 5th of January, so February 1st is about 3 weeks in. Floor is yours.
Thank you all for being here and spending so much time with us. I really appreciate it. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what I view leadership as. And I think one of the principal views of leadership is action. And I have taken action to protect Israel and her security. And keep in mind, I was doing this when my assembly district was Venice South. Very few Jewish Americans in that community. And I was doing it not because it was politically helpful, but because it was the right thing to do, and it's what I believe. In 2007, 2010, I repeatedly co-authored bills to sanction Iran and protect the state of Israel. And because of that leadership, which I will carry on in Congress, I have been endorsed by Congressman Henry Waxman, Supervisor Zeri Yaroslavsky, and Councilmember Paul Koretz. I also have had a bipartisan record. Since 2005, I've co-authored bills by Republicans. Republicans have co-authored my bills, and my view is I don't really care who the author or party is. If it's a good idea, I'm going to support it. And because of my ability to work across the aisle and get things done, I've also been endorsed by Los Angeles Times. But I'd like to take the remaining amount of my time and talk to you about my trip to Israel with my wife in 2007 with the Jewish Federation. We didn't know what to expect, and when we landed there was this huge demonstration in the airport, and we're thinking that some, security issue. As we get closer, we realize it's a teacher's strike. And we think, it's the same the whole world over. And the first place they took us to was Jerusalem. And I saw the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, extremely important to Catholics. I saw the Dome of the Rock. I saw the Wall, all within walking distance. And I instantly understood how there's been centuries of conflict with three major religions, with some of the most important places in that area. But it also showed me the promise of Israel, where you have people of different religions living peacefully together. Then they, a little bit later, took us to the Ashkelon Sarot area. They took us to a military outpost, went to the second floor of a tower, and the IDF soldier says, look across there, that's Gaza. Israel provides most of the power there, and then they launch rockets over. Made very little sense to me. A younger IDF soldier eventually comes up the stairs, gets in a very heated discussion with the older IDF soldier, and then they leave. And about 5 minutes later, briefing ends. And I asked the guide on the bus, what was that all about? And he said, the younger soldier was saying to the older one, please take these people out of here, they're making us targets. And I could see in the air the metallic balloons that signaled warnings when rockets were launched. And it was a transformative experience to understand that the people there go worship, they play, they take their children to school, they go shopping. At any moment, a rocket could come over and kill them. And I understood at an emotional level why America must do everything we can to protect Israel and her security. And as a member of Congress, I would do just that. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Rabbi Top and Beth Jacob, for providing a platform for these two mensches. Good evening.